Hey, I'm Daphne, also known as the Teacher Career Coach. I'm a former teacher and I help other teachers who are struggling identify new career paths and answer some of the tough questions to help them decide whether or not leaving teaching is the right fit for them. One of the biggest questions that teachers often ask me is whether or not they should leave teaching due to their pension or their retirement concerns. And I've always shared my own personal story, but I know that this isn't a one size fits all answer. Well, identifying new career paths for teachers is something that I feel really confident about. This is not an area that I feel like I'm an expert in. So I wanted to bring in someone who was able to lay things out in a way that teachers who have 10 years experience and teachers who have 25 years experience can all have one really helpful resource to understand the pros and cons of leaving depending on the stage in their life. Thank you so much for hopping on this call with me, Emily. This is a follow-up for all of my audience members who, depending on when you are watching this, it may be before or after my podcast interview with Emily has released. It's episode 49 of the Teacher Career Coach podcast. But we wanted to show you some really great visuals of what we talked about whether or not it's right to leave teaching financially before or after you vest into your pension. And so Emily's put together these amazing visual resources, and I'll just leave you to it.
Sure. So I run an Instagram account called Teacher Financial Coach, and I'm just trying to help all teachers understand what our benefits are. A lot of them happen to be around retirement benefits. So questions I get all the time are just around like, what does the pension look like for me? What's going to happen if I leave teaching? What are my different options? So I've put together a couple different posts just so people can understand their pension benefits and a little bit about what might happen depending on when they leave teaching or change school districts at different times during their career. So the first thing people need to do when they're considering leaving or moving is figuring out exactly how much the pension is going to offer them in retirement. And this varies quite a lot. So how to estimate your pension. Most states have pension formulas that are public. You can go search them up. I am based in New York City, so these are the New York State pension formulas for teachers. And there are different tiers within New York State, as there are for many different states. So we have tier 4, tier 5, tier 6. And you can see the formulas here. They vary just a little bit from tier to tier. So for many of us younger teachers in New York City, we're in tier 6. So basically, if you have less than 20 years of service, for each year of service that you have, you get 1.67% of your salary in retirement. Pensions are almost all based on how many years of service you have, your final salary, and that pension factor, as they say. Some states offer a little bit more, some a little bit less, but they're all usually between like 1.5% to 2% per year. So in order to estimate your pension, you're going to figure out what your final average salary is. In New York, it's based off of your last 5 years of teaching. In other states, it might be 3 years of teaching. Then you're going to take your years of service, multiply that by your pension factor, and then multiply that again by your final average salary. So that's 3 things that you're multiplying together. After you've done that, there are 2 other things you need to look at. So if you are leaving teaching prior to retirement, you have to plug in your final numbers into an inflation calculator, because what one amount is now is going to be very different by the time you start collecting your pension, if that's 20 years in the future. And the second thing is a lot of states have penalties if you decide to collect your pension early. So in New York State, for example, our full retirement age is 63. But if you start collecting at 55, 58, 60, you're going to lose just a little bit of that in penalty for collecting early. So you'll just have those things to think about. So here is an example of how that might work. Let's say you've worked in the New York City Department of Ed for 10 years and you're about to move out of the state. Your average salary over the last 5 years comes out to be $80,000. You're 35 years old now, and you'll collect your pension in 23 years, which is age 63 for you. So here's how that math shakes out. Final average salary, 80,000. I'm going to take 80,000 times 10 years of service times the pension factor, which is written in that formula as 0.0167. That's going to give this example $13,000 per year in pension payout. But because we're stopping service early and it's not quite at the time you're going to collect it, you should plug that into an inflation calculator. The math might get a little tricky, but you can honestly just Google an inflation calculator, put the numbers in, put in the year you're going to retire, and it'll spit that number right out for you, nice and easy. So when I put that into an inflation calculator, that $13,000 is really going to feel like $6,500 per year in 2049 when you collect that pension. So it's just really important to consider inflation if you're leaving a little bit early. It's going to make your pension seem a lot smaller.
And Emily, before you go to the next slide, or you can actually stay on this slide, don't worry about it. But a lot of teachers that I work with are either considering leaving the profession altogether, but the first piece of advice I always give them is to change school districts, schools, or grade levels. Just a change of environment sometimes is a big contributing factor to whether or not they feel like the career is sustainable for them. But for those teachers who are thinking of leaving districts, does that mean that they'll need to calculate their pension every time they leave a district, or is it just state by state?
I think it's important to kind of have a ballpark estimation of what your pension is going to be, regardless of where you are in your career, whether you're staying forever, whether you're thinking about leaving, whether you are leaving. Now, if you change districts within a state, most likely, depending on the state, your pension will transfer. So for teachers who are currently in New York City, if they end up moving up to Albany or out to Long Island, they can just take all of that, fill out some paperwork, and then they're still within the pension system. So they don't really lose anything per se. So definitely moving within a state doesn't mean you're going to be losing much. Depending on your state, you should check.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for clarifying.
Awesome. All right. So the next thing is like the math sounds like a lot at first, but I wanted to show just how this shakes out for different teachers, depending on how long they stay versus where they are in their career. If they're early career teachers versus their career changers who started like in their 50s, for example, it makes a big difference. So again, using the same pension formulas that I just showed, Tier 6 for New York, let's take a look at how this would work for a mid-career teacher who leaves after 12 years of service in her district. So her final average salary in New York after 12 years would be about $105,000. So her pension is going to come out to be $21,000 per year, which is great. But since this person is not collecting her pension for 29 years, she'll need to factor in inflation. So assuming that inflation of about 2.5%, which is what the inflation calculators online use, that'll be worth about $10,000 per year by the time she retires. So it's not a huge amount of money because inflation really eats that up. Now, let's look at someone, same formula, same salary, same years of service, but this person, instead of starting at the beginning of their career, is starting at the end. They're a career changer. So they're right around retirement age now. They're 62. This person has 12 years in the system. Their pension is going to be $21,000 per year, just like the previous example. But because they're collecting immediately, inflation is not going to end up taking any chunk out of that. So he's really going to get $21,000 per year from his pension. So it is a little unfair the way it shakes out that way, but you should be aware of the effects of starting in the beginning versus starting at the end. The pension really gets big if you stay for your full career for teaching. This is where you're going to be replacing the majority of your income. So if I'm looking at veteran teacher Eleonora, who's 62 and has 30 years in the New York City DOE, her final average salary is about 120,000, and she's ready to retire. Her pension is going to end up being $66,000 per year, which is more than half her income right there every year in retirement without any additional savings. That pension has really done a lot of work for her. And then the last example I have is a veteran teacher who collects his pension early. So same number of years as the previous example, 30 years, but he is ready to retire at 55, which is the earliest age you can collect in New York, but there is a penalty involved. So if he were to collect then, it would start at 66,000, but taking the early penalty, he'd be receiving $31,700. So he's losing almost half the pension from collecting early. So it's just something he can think about. Maybe if he wants to stay 1 or 2 more years, the penalty will be a little bit smaller. But everyone's got different life circumstances, so you got to do what you got to do. Okay. So another question around pensions that I get is people who are not vested in the pension in their district yet. So what that means is you have to work a minimum number of years to collect a pension at all. In New York, currently you have to work 10 years in the district in order to receive a pension. If you don't stay 10 years, the money you've contributed into the pension, you'll get that money back. But you won't get a pension payout in retirement. People want to know, I'm 8 years in, I am thinking about moving somewhere. Should I suck it up and stay 2 more years and then move just to get the pension? Or, how much is it really worth? Can I move now if that's what I need to do for my family, for example? This is super common. And again, it really, really depends on how old you are. Age makes a big difference here. So this is an example again of an earlier career teacher. So in this example, Julia is 32 and starting her 9th year in the district. She's trying to figure out if she should stay that full 10th year to vest. So I broke it out into 2 different scenarios. So she works 9 years and then leaves New York City. So she misses the pension by a year. The money she's contributed, which in New York, we call our QPP, her balance will be, she'll have contributed $33,000 to that. If she took all that money that she has personally paid into the pension system, withdrew it and invested it on her own until age 63, that balance would be $270,000. And that's if she never contributed again. She just took that pile of money that she had paid into the pension, moved it into an investment account, and then just left it there. A safe withdrawal rate from that balance in retirement would provide her with $10,800 in income per year. If instead she stayed 1 more year, got the full 10 years, vested, and now will receive a pension, I just ran the pension formula for her, and she would get $13,700 per year, but inflation adjusted, it's going to just be $6,600 per year. So for younger teachers, this is very often the case, not just in New York, but unless you are staying a very long time, the pension is not going to be worth it for you just to stay and invest for it. It really doesn't make sense unless you're in the system for a long time or you're older. In this case, Julia would actually have more money in retirement if she left before vesting.
And Emily, just to hop in here, this is exactly what happened in my own situation when I left teaching. Is I did the math, and I'm in California, and if I wanted to vest into my teaching pension, it would take me 2 more years. After I left, it was the 3rd year. And I did the math, and it actually came out to, they were just going to contribute an additional $500 per month for the rest of, after I retired. And I realized that I could easily make that up with the money that I had already contributed.
Yeah, and when we talk about like investing the balance when you leave, a lot of times it really is a set it and forget it. It's not like a scary, overwhelming thing. So this is like definitely a great option for someone who's not going to vest or will just barely vest in a pension. However, there are situations where the pension is very much worth staying for. So someone who is a career changer, the math works out a lot differently because any investments that they don't have a lot of years left for it to gain interest. And at the same time, their pension's not going to lose much to inflation because they're probably going to collect it either immediately or pretty soon. So in this situation, George is 62. He's doing teaching at the end of his career. He's in his 9th year. If he were to leave after 9 years of service and then just took what he had paid into the pension system, because it doesn't have a lot of time to compound, he's just going to have a balance of about $35,000. So if he were to withdraw at a safe rate from that when he retired, it would only provide him with $1,400 per year, which is really not very much. On the flip side, the pension is going to work out to be $13,700 per year, and inflation's not going to take a bite out of that if he retires immediately. So that's just, almost 10 times as much money per year. For George, I would really suggest, if he can, stay one more year so that he could vest in the pension, because that's just such a big difference.
And just to clarify, you mean career changer as someone who went into teaching later in their life, as opposed to many of the career changers who are probably watching, thinking of leaving teaching at whatever stage they're at.
Exactly. Yes. When I talk about like career changer teachers, these are people who changed careers and became teachers. Yeah. Okay. Pension aside, the next big thing is what to do with your money if you leave. This is a little bit specific to New York City teachers, but again, it's a pretty common system, so it'll probably work similarly no matter where you are. So there's a difference between if you're vested in the pension versus not vested in the pension. If you're not vested in New York, you have 7 years to move your money. Most states will probably give you a certain number of years so you can kind of keep your funds there. So in New York, if you know with certainty that you're not going to return to the district, it's better to move your money as soon as possible. This is just because you can get better returns if you invest it on your own versus just leaving it there. And second all, if you think you might return, it's okay to leave it there for the full 7 years, because if you left and then you come back to the district, everything is still there. All your pension time is still there. I am someone who actually left the New York City Department of Education, worked elsewhere, and then ended up returning a couple years later. I'm really glad that I left my money there for a little while because it was very easy to return to it. So if you think you might return, that's definitely an option. You can move all your money out. You can move your pension contributions. You can move your 403B or TDA contributions out as well. If you are vested, then like you have the pension, your money you've contributed kind of like belongs to that system now. You're just going to, when you leave, just kind of leave everything be for the pension. You'll get that pension when you decide to collect it at whatever age that you are eligible to do so. And then for us, our 403B is kind of run through the city. So that's another factor, but most teachers don't have to worry too much about that. If you have a 403B open in your current district and you are leaving for another job or you're leaving for another school, you're going to want to roll that 403B over eventually. For most people, it's best to roll it into an IRA. So you can open an IRA with a brokerage. I really like Vanguard. That's what I use for all of my rollover retirement accounts. And it's just some simple paperwork. Everything moves over, and then like you have more control over it. And if you are moving to another district within the same state, you should check the policies for your state. But a lot of these things can just roll over pretty directly, which makes it nice and easy for you. So those are all your options. That's what you'd be thinking about in terms of like what your pension is going to provide for you, what to do with your money when you leave. I know a lot of people think of the pension as being these golden handcuffs, like they have this great benefit and they can't leave. But in reality, it's a lot more variable than people think. So you really need to consider your own situation when making those calls. You might not be losing out on as much as you think you are, just because inflation plays a large part for most younger teachers.
And 100%, if somebody is watching this and you feel like your mental or physical health is, severely impacted by your teaching career, this should not be the thing that is stopping you from doing something that you need to do, whether that means taking a 1-year break and trying something else and leaving all of your money where it is and either returning or rolling it over after that year is up once you've kind of gotten that clarity. Just know that you have options and that you are doing all of your research and talking to all of the people that work at your district that would support you in understanding where you are at on your pension vesting schedule, because there are so many really helpful resources for you when it comes to this. Emily, thank you so much for coming and showing all these great visuals. I know that so many teachers are looking just to understand all the roadblocks that they might face when it comes to a career switch. So just thank you again so much for coming and talking to the audience. Once again, everybody who's listening, you can find Emily at Teacher Financial Coach on Instagram, but you can also find her on the Teacher Career Coach podcast, episode 49. I'm going to link it below. Depending on when you're listening to this, it may or may not have already come out, but you can also subscribe to the Teacher Career Coach podcast and hear interviews with former teachers or all the different things that you may need to think about, how to weigh the pros and cons of leaving teaching if it's something that's weighing heavy on you right now. So thank you guys so much for watching. And thank you again, Emily, so much for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to see more videos like this in the future, make sure you press the subscribe button.